On Saturday, Israeli forces conducted a daytime raid on the Nuseirat refugee camp that freed 4 Israelis held hostage in Gaza since October 7th. The hostages were being held in 2 apartments in the camp. Israel called in heavy strikes from the land, air, and sea to cover their evacuation to the coast. At least 274 Palestinians were killed in the attack, including at least 64 children. Nearly 700 were wounded.
Israeli forces simultaneously striking 2 buildings housing the captives, using the daytime to catch Hamas by surprise. The operation resulting in the rescue of Noah Argamani, Almog Mayer Yan, Andrei Koslov, and Shlomi Ziv.
Feelings of relief following word that 4 Israeli hostages were freed over the weekend was quickly tempered by news of the hundreds of Palestinians who were killed as a result. At least that was the emotional roller coaster experienced by those who value Palestinian lives just as much as they value Israeli lives. With the help of US intelligence, a special operations unit with the Israeli Defense Forces called Yamam were able to locate the 4 hostages at the Nuseirat refugee camp in central Gaza. Officials from the Israeli Defense Forces said they knew Noah Argamani had been moved around Gaza more than once during her time in captivity. Analysts confirmed she was now being held alone in a first-floor apartment. 3 other hostages, Almog Mirjan, 22, Audrey Koslov, 27, and Shlomi Ziv, 41, were on the 3rd floor of a building nearby, about 200 meters away. But the rescues came at a steep price for Palestinian civilians who had been displaced from their homes and were sheltering at that refugee camp.
This is a refugee camp, Amra, that was full of people because many of them had come from the area of Rafah, where the Israelis are currently conducting an offensive, a town that's basically now a ghost town. Everybody has left, and so many of the people who were killed yesterday in Nuseirat were in fact coming from that area. Now, we just received the latest numbers from the Gaza Ministry of Health, who say that yesterday's death toll from that Israeli operation was 274 with 698 wounded. That brings the death toll since the 7th of October in Gaza, according to the Ministry of Health there, to 37,084. Now, yesterday, the scenes in the hospital were absolute pandemonium. Lots of wounded women and children. The morgues were full. They ended up having to put the dead simply on the pavement outside.
So at least 274 killed. As we know, the Palestinian Health Ministry does not note what number of those individuals are Hamas militants, but we do know that at least 64 of those dead Palestinians were children. And we should all take in what the CNN reporter just said there. After Israel attacked the southern town of Rafah, where around 1 million displaced Palestinians were sheltering, civilians then evacuated to the Nuseirat refugee camp for safety. But as we've learned over and over again, no area of Gaza is safe for Palestinians. In fact, the IDF was fully aware of how their planned rescue operation was going to get a lot of civilians killed. That's because they made the conscious decision to carry this mission out during the daytime to surprise the Hamas militants. But it would mean more Palestinian civilians on the streets. But oh well, as long as America's political elite have their backs, they're free to slaughter as many innocent civilians as they'd like. And they do, in fact, have the Biden administration's support. The United States, which assisted Israel with this operation, also knew that there would be a high civilian death toll.
An American official confirming to ABC News that the US provided intelligence and expertise to support the hostage recovery efforts, while stressing that no US boots were on the ground as part of the operation.
A US official tells CNN that an American cell in Israel supported the rescue efforts working with Israeli forces. That in reference to a team that has been assisting Israel since October 7th to information gather on hostages.
It's worth sharing more details about what happened on one of the single deadliest days in Gaza during the beginning of this war. The Post spoke to more than a dozen witnesses on the scene for more clarity on how the operation played out. Palestinian witnesses described some troops arriving in 2 undercover vehicles, one of which resembled the trucks used by Israel to bring commercial goods into Gaza. The other was a white Mercedes truck piled high with furniture and other belongings, a common sight in a camp that's home to thousands of displaced families. By the way, the IDF using what appeared to be a humanitarian aid truck or a truck that's used to bring in commercial goods into the Gaza Strip is a violation of international law and also puts humanitarian aid workers at risk, because now Hamas militants are gonna wonder whether or not humanitarian aid trucks actually have Israeli soldiers within them. The IDF denies this, but the Washington Post was able to verify 2 videos that showed a box truck marked with a brand of dishwashing soap traveling in the company of Israeli armored vehicles on a road about a mile west of the raid, or at least what they're referring to as a raid. It was more of a massacre. Hussam al-Arouki, 33, was returning from the bakery with his brother, Assam, when he recounted that 2 men in plain clothes and about 10 heavily armed soldiers poured out of the back of the Mercedes. The soldiers opened fire, hitting his brother 3 times, he said. It would take at least an hour for Hussam to reach his brother and rush him to a hospital where he remains in critical condition. Others provided similar accounts to the press.
We were in Nuseirat camp. Special forces arrived from an Apache helicopter, and there was a white car with special forces. The Apache started to bomb and fire directly at people. There was a large number of martyrs and injured people. People fled. There's a big number of displaced people. Schools and hospitals are filled with displaced people. There's a large number of martyrs, and firing was direct. We brought 10 injured people in 1 ambulance. One of them was shot directly. We barely made it out through the alleyways.
Now, as the operation was underway, the IDF knew that one of the hostages, Noah Argamani, was being held separately from the other 3 male hostages on the 1st floor of an apartment building. According to IDF spokesman Daniel Hagari, the men guarding her were caught off guard and completely surprised when Israeli soldiers arrived. But that allegedly was not the case with the other hostages, which defeated the purpose of doing a daytime operation while the streets were full of civilians. The guards with the 3 male hostages had not been taken by surprise. An IDF commander was shot as they entered the building. A firefight erupted, exposing the covert mission. The IDF soldier who was shot would later die from his wounds. But the IDF soldiers did manage to get the 3 hostages and the injured soldier into a vehicle. They claimed that as they tried to escape, the car they were in came under fire by Hamas, who they claim attacked with rocket-propelled grenades and rifle fire. Israeli officials claimed that at one point they were forced to run into a nearby building as commanders called for air support. And that's when the operation turned into a complete and utter bloodbath. Explosions rocked the narrow streets, which have only grown more crowded in recent weeks with families displaced by Israel's offensive in southern Gaza. The Air Force started shooting to give them a corridor, a wall of fire, said retired Major General David Soar, a former Yamam commander. There was carnage everywhere, Abu Asi said, including dead women and children. The roads were filled with tanks, artillery, body parts, and injured people. Nothing but a haul of blood. Paramedic Abdel Hamid Garab told the Washington Post, quote, "They were shooting and targeting everything. None of us could even tell what was happening outside." So was this the best possible way for Israel to rescue hostages? And would the United States military be okay with them carrying out such a high military operation that led to such a high civilian death toll? Look, we already know that the highest number of hostages were saved or released during a week-long pause in fighting. During the pause, 81 Israeli citizens, including those who also hold citizenship from other countries, were released. And by the way, I just want to note, this has not been confirmed, but Hamas is also alleging that 3 other hostages, including an American citizen, were killed as a result of this operation. You should take that with a grain of salt right now until we have further confirmation. But if that is true, that means the IDF managed to save 4 hostages while killing 274 Palestinians and potentially 3 additional hostages. Now, Biden's national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, seems to agree that a ceasefire is the best way to save hostages, which is what he told Margaret Brennan on Face the Nation over the weekend.
By far the most effective, certain, and right way to get all of the hostages out is to get a comprehensive ceasefire and hostage deal that President Biden described in public.
But in the meantime, the US will assist Israel with the weapons and intel they need to carry out whatever mission they'd like, regardless of the collateral damage. But hey, I'm just a host on this show. I'm no military expert, so why don't we actually hear from a few? CNN spoke to retired Colonel Cedric Layton and national security analyst Peter Bergen about the hostage rescue operation, and what they had to say is definitely worth listening to.
Think about the Osama bin Laden raid. The Obama administration debated what to do for literally months, and one of their big considerations was dropping a bomb on the compound would kill quite a lot of people in a city, in Abbottabad. Think about also the Trump administration also debated for many, many weeks about killing the leader of ISIS in 2019 in Syria, also with the issue of civilian casualties. And look, Colonel Layton can correct me. I don't think there's a universe where the US Special Operations would have approved this raid with this level of casualties, whether it's 100, as the Israelis say, or 270, as we just learned from Ben Wiedemann. Clearly, it's an unacceptably large number of casualties. It's great that the hostages were returned, but I don't see a world in which the U.S. Special Operations community would have gone forward with this raid, knowing of having this level of potential number of casualties.
Do you agree, Colonel Layton?
I do. I agree totally with what Peter just said.
Finally, it's not just Palestinian civilians who live in terror due to Israel's aerial bombardments and violent military operations in Gaza. Rescued hostages have actually given the world some insight into what they themselves experienced while they were held captive in Gaza. Louis Har is one of those hostages. He spent 129 days in the Palestinian territory and agreed to speak to Haaretz about what he feared the most as he was held in captivity. He said, quote, "Our greatest fear was the IDF's planes and the concern that they would bomb the building we were in. I was a soldier myself once, but the feeling that it could be our own bombs, our own planes, that this is what would kill us, that's very scary and very anxiety inducing." Yeah, I bet. I can't imagine how anxiety inducing that is. But what about the possibility of getting killed by Hamas? What did Louis have to say about that? And how did the other hostages feel about it? Well, he tells Haaretz that we decided for ourselves, the whole gang of us together, that we wouldn't resist the hostage takers and wouldn't cause conflicts. We respected each other and we were calm. We weren't worried that they'd do something to us all of a sudden. We didn't object to anything, so I wasn't afraid they'd kill me. But I knew that if they got the order to kill us, they'd do it instantly, wouldn't think twice. Still, I knew it wasn't like in other cases where they just killed for no reason. The people who kept watch over us were really just keeping watch and wanted to make the exchange with their own people. And they made sure we were okay, and so did we. It's a punch in the gut to see the United States, under the leadership of the very decent Joe Biden, assist Israel in the worst way possible to save hostages. But this is who Biden really is. It's time to accept that. And he's proven to be anything but decent. And look, I want to be clear. I'm happy for the Israeli families who get to embrace their loved ones once again. Like I said, when the news first broke, you feel this sense of relief. And then as the story develops and you learn more details about how many people died, it definitely takes away from the relief and happiness you feel. It's impossible not to feel crippling despair on behalf of all the parents in Gaza left childless, or the children who are now orphaned over the brutality that our government proudly supports. It's just disgusting and it's shameful, and I'm tired of seeing it.
If you enjoyed this video, that's because of our members. They make us independent, they make us strong, and they make us honest. Become a member today by hitting the join button below.